Okay, number 32, comparative and absolute advantage question. So you're going to see this on the micro and the macro exam on the multiple choice, but it has only shown up on the macro free response. So you're going to see it on both multiple choice, but only the macro free response has a possibility. So it says Amy and Brad produce and consume apple pie and ice cream. Brad makes 5 apple pies, 10 gallons of ice cream. Amy makes 15 or 15. Based on the information above, you can correctly conclude that what. So with these types of questions, you can almost always eliminate answer choices. So if you go through, you can eliminate answer choice C, which says that Brad does not have a comparative advantage in either. That won't ever be the case. One person or country will always have a comparative advantage in one thing. The other will have a comparative advantage in the other thing. So it's not C. Also, if you look, answer choice B says Brad has a comparative advantage in ice cream, and E says that Amy has a comparative advantage in ice cream. It doesn't say that directly, but if Brad's opportunity cost of making ice cream is higher, that means that Amy has a comparative advantage in producing ice cream. So it's either B or E, because one of them has to have a comparative advantage in ice cream. So it's one of those two. If that didn't make sense to you, if that part, if it doesn't sync up with you that answer choice E is saying that Amy has a comparative advantage in ice cream, that's okay. If you draw your tic-tac-toe board, extra horizontal line, Brad makes 5 pies or 10 ice cream. That means that every time he produces 1 gallon of ice cream, he gives up making half a pie. And Amy, it's a 1-for-1 trade-off. So when Amy makes ice cream, she gives up a full pie. When Brad makes ice cream, he gives up half a pie. So Brad makes ice cream cheaper in terms of what he gives up when he produces a gallon. So Brad has a comparative advantage in ice cream. So answer choice B. 33, the government imposes a per unit tax on personal computers. Consumer surplus in the personal computer market will do what? Well, pretty intuitive here. If we're taxed on an item, our price goes up and we're going to buy less. So that's going to decrease our consumer surplus. So your answer is A or B for sure. And so A says decrease because the price paid by consumers will go up. That's it. B says decrease because there will be more computers on the market. That doesn't sync. Like that doesn't make sense. So it's definitely going to decrease our consumer surplus because we're buying fewer computers, and each computer we're buying is at an increased price because the producer is going to push at least a portion of that tax onto the consumer. So your answer for 33 is A. 34. Assume the supply of corn is relatively inelastic. The demand is relatively elastic. So this is tax incidence. So remember, when a tax is imposed, the producer writes the check for the tax, but the burden of the tax will either fall on consumers or producers, or more often than not, some kind of combination of the two. And it depends on which group is more inelastic. Remember, inelastic means they're not going to change their behavior by much, regardless of the price change. So here it says the supply is relatively inelastic, the demand is relatively elastic. So because the supply is more inelastic than demand, the tax will be mostly on the sellers, not entirely on the sellers. So it's not C. It would be entirely on the sellers under 2 circumstances: if the supply was perfectly inelastic or the demand were perfectly elastic. Neither one of those is the case in this question. So it's mostly on sellers because sellers, the supply is more inelastic. So 34 is D. Okay, 35. Assume the utility schedule for Alaya's ice cream consumption. If she consumes 6 units, what's the value of her total utility? What a lot of people are going to do is they're going to look at this, quantity consumed 6, utility -2, answer is E -2, but that's not it, right? Because that column is not total utility, that column is marginal utility. So if you want Alaya's total utility, you have to add up the marginal utility derived from the consumption of each unit of ice cream. Ice cream, ice cream, okay? So that'd be 8 plus 6 for the second one, so 14, 18, 20, still 20, and back to 18. She's like puking all over the place now. So it's 18 answer choice C. So you add up each individual row of marginal utility based on how many units she consumes, which it says here is 6. So your answer is 18, answer choice C. Okay. Number 36. Economies of scale. So anytime you see economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, or constant returns to scale, we're talking long run average total cost curve. Okay, long run average total cost curve. Economies of scale is when a firm is becoming more efficient as judged by a greater percentage of output than the percent change in inputs. For example, if you increase your number of resources by 10%, and the result is you increase your output by 30%, you're becoming more efficient as you increase your inputs. Okay, if you increase your inputs, your workers or machines or whatever, by 10%, and you get an increase of 10% in your output, that's constant returns to scale. If you increase your number of inputs by 10% and your output only increases by 5%, now you're starting to experience decreasing or diseconomies of scale. Okay, so if you're experiencing economies of scale, we know we're looking at long run average total cost curve, so it's D or E. And since we're becoming more efficient, long run average total cost curve is decreasing as the firm increases its output. So answer choice is D. But again, anytime you see economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, constant returns to scale, that is only going to show up if they're asking about long run average total cost curve. 37, a monopolistic labor market. So we're talking about a labor market here, a monopolistic labor market. So it's a monopoly in the labor market. There's one firm doing all the hiring. A firm will continue to hire workers until the marginal revenue product of labor. So the first part should be pretty easy. Whether it's a monopolistic labor market or perfectly competitive labor market, they're going to hire as long as the additional revenue is equal to or greater than the additional cost of the resource. So they're going to hire until the marginal revenue product or the additional revenue generated equals the marginal resource cost. So it's A or B or C for sure. And then it says resulting in more or fewer workers is going to be fewer workers at a lower wage, which is answer choice B. A monopsony is inefficient in the same way that a monopoly in the product market is inefficient. In the product market, a monopoly is inefficient because they are charging too high a price and selling too low a quantity. It's the same idea with the resource market, but since we're talking about hiring workers, they hire too few workers and pay too low a wage relative to perfect competition. So we know they're going to produce where marginal revenue product hits marginal resource cost. And the result with the monopsony is they're hiring fewer workers and paying too low a wage. So your answer is B. Okay, 38. Assume that a monopolistically competitive firm is currently maximizing profit, output of 100, price of 50. Which of the following is true? So they are maximizing profit, they're producing 100, price is $50. Okay, so with a question like this, the easiest thing to do is just to draw a graph. A says total revenue is maximized when they produce 100 units. B says marginal revenue equals 50. C says marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue when they produce 150. D says marginal cost is minimized when the firm produces 100. And E, average total cost is minimized when the firm produces 100. So let's just draw the monopolistic competition graph. You have a downward sloping demand curve, downward sloping marginal revenue curve, marginal cost down and up, it's a Nike swoosh, y-axis price, x-axis quantity. They're maximizing profit. That means they're producing where MR hits MC. That gives you your quantity. The price is derived from the demand curve above. Okay, I'm going to show this to you in a second. Okay, and then it says that the price is $50. Remember, the price derived from the demand curve. So the price is $50. I put it as P1, but I put $50 right there where it hits the demand curve. So this is what it looks like, right? So monopolistic competition, downward sloping demand curve, marginal revenue downward sloping below demand, marginal cost down and up, Nike swoosh. They produce where MR hits MC, that's profit maximizing. The price is derived from the demand curve above, and that price is $50. That's what it tells us, okay? So A says total revenue is maximized, or they produce 100. Well, it says they're producing 100. Are they maximizing total revenue? No, because total revenue is at MR equals 0. Okay, so that's not where they're producing. B says marginal revenue equals 50 at that point. Well, marginal revenue is below the price at that point, right? Marginal revenue curve is below the demand curve, and the price of $50 is derived from the demand curve above MR equals MC. So that's not it. C, marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue when they produce 150. So if they were to produce 150, that would be like out here somewhere, right? Because the quantity is 100. So if they're producing out here, the marginal cost is absolutely above the marginal revenue, right? Beyond the profit maximizing point, marginal cost exceeds marginal revenue. So that's your answer, is answer choice C. You're not going to be able to get that question without drawing the graph, probably, okay? So that's a situation, and I said this on the last video, there are going to be a lot of questions on the AP test where, man, if you just take the 15 seconds to sketch out the graph and the margins of the test, and then go through the answer choices, you're gonna come up with the right answer. Okay, so 38 is C. 39, there are 4 firms in an oligopolistic industry. The 4 firms agree to collude and act as a monopoly. If one of the firms violates the agreement and charges a lower price or sells a larger quantity than what was agreed on, what's going to happen in the short run? So the only way an oligopoly can collude is if there's a way to punish the cheaters. That's why the only time we have a colluding oligopoly, it's called a cartel, and it's usually in a drug war and or like a drug cartel. And the way you punish the cheaters by murdering them and their family. And so that it's really hard for a colluding oligopoly to be sustained over a long period of time because there's an incentive to cheat. So what happens in the short run? In the short run, the firm that cheats is going to earn a higher profit. And so that is A or B. And that, yeah, so A or B. Will the industry profits be lower or higher? The industry profits are going to be lower, right? Either because you've increased the overall supply in the market, which is going to decrease the price per unit sold, or they are undercutting their competitors, which lowers the overall profit in the market. So your answer for 39 is the firm that cheats earns higher profit, and the industry profit is going to be lower. Okay, let's look at number 40. Which of the following can give a firm market power? So what can give a firm market power? This is going to be some kind of barrier to entry, right? This is what gives firms which are oligopolistic or monopolies their power is barriers to entry, preventing other firms from entering and eating into their profits. So A says having access to common information. Well, everybody has access to that, so that's not it. B says producing a standardized or homogeneous product. That's not it. There's nothing separating them from anybody else. C says you don't have barriers to entry or exit. Well, that's not it either. They have no power then if people can enter with ease. D says having a large number of competitors. Also no. They don't have a whole lot of power if there's a lot of competitors. E says you have economies of scale in production. Yeah, that means that you're able to produce things a lot more efficiently because you have economies of scale. There's a reason why if I started my own Amazon competitor that would crush me, because they have economies of scale. They can crank things out super efficiently, and I can't because I don't have the infrastructure or the capability to do that, and they do. So anytime it's referencing a firm's market power, you're looking for some kind of barrier to entry, and E is the only one that makes sense there. The rest really are the opposite. They're the opposite of barriers to entry. In monopolistic competition, what is the goal of advertising? Monopolistic competition, we're talking about burger restaurants, right? So the goal of advertising is to take market share away from your competitors. And you do that the main way you do that is by increasing the demand for your specific product, or by making the demand for your product more inelastic, meaning even if you charge a higher price than your competitors, people still want your product because it's better. And so you are changing the demand in the minds of consumers. Your good is now more inelastic rather than elastic. And so the goal of advertising is not to reduce costs. It's actually going to increase your costs because now you're advertising. So it's not A. The objective is not to reduce the average cost. C says make a firm's demand curve more elastic. You don't want your customers to be more sensitive to price. D says make a firm's demand curve less elastic. That's it. And you definitely don't want your firm's demand curve to shift to the left. So your answer is D. You want your demand, the demand for your product, to be less elastic or more inelastic. 42 and 43, you're looking at this total revenue for a monopolist in the product market. Note this is the column on the right is total revenue, not marginal revenue. This question says the marginal product of labor is constant at 1 unit for every additional unit of labor. So that means that for each worker that you add, you're getting 1 more unit of production. The monopolist hires labor in a perfectly competitive market at a wage rate of $5 per hour. What's the marginal revenue product of labor when the firm produces the 3rd unit of output? The marginal revenue product of labor. So the additional revenue from the 3rd worker is 7. Your additional revenue generated, that's this column. Your marginal revenue is the difference between total revenue with 3 and total revenue with 2. So your marginal revenue product is $7 for that 3rd worker. Answer choice B. The next question, same grid here, same graph, or same data. It says the marginal product of labor is constant at 1 unit for every additional unit of labor. Okay, so you're hiring 1 more person each time. The monopolist hires labor. Okay, we got it. How many units of labor should the firm employ to maximize profits? You're paying $5 an hour. So the worker needs to generate an additional $5, right? And so first guy adds 11, you pay him 5. You want to hire that guy. Next guy adds 9, you pay him 5. You want to hire that guy. Next guy only generates 7. You want to hire that bum? He's generating $2 less than the guy before him. But yeah, you still want to hire him because the $7 he's generating is more than the 5 you're paying him. So it's still adding to your bottom line. Okay. The 4th guy is even, right? He generates $5 of revenue. You pay him $5, so it's square. That's going to be your answer is 4. The reason why 3 is not an answer choice here is because you can make the argument that you might as well just hire 3 then, because because the 4th worker is you're breaking even on that guy, right? And that's just marginal analysis. And so there's a reason why they omitted why they didn't put 3 as an answer choice there. But you're going to hire where the marginal revenue product hits the marginal resource cost. Basic marginal analysis, there's going to be a handful of questions just like that on the micro multiple choice, and maybe one of the free response. 44, in a perfectly competitive market for a good with a downward sloping demand curve, upward sloping supply curve, so normal supply and demand, the marginal social benefit is greater than the marginal social cost. The government imposition of a new per unit tax on the production of the good would do what? Intuitively, we know that if you impose a tax on the product, it's going to decrease consumer surplus of the good. A says it's going to have no effect on the price. That's not it. If you tax a good, there's going to be an increase in the price unless the demand is perfectly elastic, which it's not. It says it's downward sloping. Or the supply is perfectly inelastic, which it's not. It says upward sloping supply curve. So it's not A. B says it's going to increase consumer surplus. No, you charge us more. That doesn't increase our consumer surplus. C says it's going to increase our deadweight loss. We'll double back to that in a second. D says it's going to increase producer surplus. Again, no, you're making the good more expensive. It's not going to increase producer surplus. And E says it's going to increase the quantity sold of the good. No, they're not going to sell more if the price is higher. That doesn't even make sense. So B, D, and E don't even make sense. A says you put a tax on it and nothing happens. That also doesn't make sense. So your answer is it's going to increase the deadweight loss. Now, the tricky part here is to talk about marginal social benefit, marginal social costs. And so I hope that in your mind you thought, oh, it's something about externalities. Well, if it's a per unit tax, you would think, well, then it must have a negative externality. That's why they're doing that. And so if they impose the tax, it would reduce the deadweight loss. It didn't need to be super confused because it says increase deadweight loss. And I just told you that's the correct answer. So this is not a negative externality question. again, you would think so, because it's talking about marginal social benefit, marginal social cost, and then the government taxing it. So it would make sense for it to be a negative externality. But it says the benefit exceeds the cost, implying that there is a positive externality, which means the government is idiotic if they're imposing a per unit tax. If the objective is to decrease the deadweight loss and bring about the socially optimal quantity, they should impose a per unit subsidy, not a per unit tax. So your answer for 44 is C. And again, you could probably just use logic and common sense and eliminate A, B, D, E, and then you're left with just one answer choice. Okay, 45. Oh boy. We have not talked about the Lorenz curve, I don't think. But let me go ahead and explain it super quick. Maybe we have. If we did, it was really, really quick at the very end of, no, I don't think we've talked about it. Maybe we have. You'll tell me later. The Lorenz curve shows the gap in, it basically shows income distribution, okay? And so this 45-degree line here, okay, this line with a slope of 1, that is perfect equal distribution of wealth across the board. Every single person in the United States makes the exact same amount of money. That's not desirable. We want there to be an incentive for people to produce, an incentive for people to innovate, and people aren't going to do that if no matter how hard they work, they're being paid the same as their alcoholic uncle or something, right? So there needs to be an incentive there, and so perfect equal distribution along the income scale is not desirable. It's going to yield awful results. But that doesn't mean that the current way that income is distributed is perfect either. So what you can see here is that 45-degree line is perfect distribution. The curve way down here is actual distribution before the imposition of a tax. This also probably isn't ideal. What you can see is that the bottom 20% earn 5% of the income. The bottom 60% only earn 20% of the income. This probably isn't ideal. I don't really know. It depends on a lot of different factors and unintended consequences of trying to mess with the distribution. But the objective of transfer payments, the objective of our progressive tax system is to move our Lorenz curve, which is what this is called, from where it is closer to that 45-degree line. Again, the 45-degree line is not ideal, but the objective of our progressive tax system, the objective of transfer payments is to move that income distribution closer to that 45-degree line. Hopefully that makes sense. That's the Lorenz curve. You probably won't see it on the AP test. They asked it 4 years ago, apparently, but I'd be surprised if you see it. So it says the Lorenz curve in the graph above shows the effect of a tax system on income inequality. Which of the following statements must be true? A says, before the tax, 20% of families live below the poverty level, and after the tax, none did. Well, there's nothing on here about poverty level, so we don't have enough information there. B, the tax redistributed income only from the top 20% of families to the lowest 20%. We know that's not true because these people here who were 60%, they are moving as well. So it's not just the top 20% and the bottom 20% who are affected. C says the tax system is proportional. Nope, if it was proportional, there would be no change. We're all taxed the same percentage of our income. D says the tax system is regressive. That would be moving money from the bottom tier to the top tier. That's not what's happening here. And E says the tax system is progressive. This is our federal income tax system. This is the objective of a progressive tax system, is to close this income distribution gap. So your answer for this question about the Lorenz curve, 45, is E. 46. I'll go back over the Lorenz curve when we're reviewing like day before test. It's one of those things we're not going to spend a ton of time on, but I want you to be exposed to it before the test. 46. Movement along the PPC shows what? If you just move along the production possibilities curve, it's not changing our productive capability. It doesn't mean we're becoming more efficient or less efficient. It just means now we're producing a different combination of goods. That's all that means. So movement along that curve shows what? A sounds pretty good to me. Trade-offs society faces, because if you move along that curve in order to get more capital goods, the only way to do that is by having fewer consumer goods and vice versa, right? So your answer there is going to be A. Yeah, okay, 47. Assume that the market for beef is perfectly competitive and in equilibrium, so perfect competition in the product market. Which of all would most likely result in an increase in price and quantity? So basic supply and demand, what's going to result in an increase in price and increase in quantity? Increase in price and increase in quantity is going to be an increase in the demand for beef. So what's going to result in an increase in demand for beef? A says you increase the supply of chicken. If you increase the supply of chicken, again, we're analyzing the beef market. If you increase the supply of chicken, the price goes down. More people buy chicken, fewer people buy beef. That decreases the demand for beef. And we're looking for an increase in the demand for beef. So that's not it. B, a decrease in consumer income, assuming beef is a normal good. Nope, that's going to decrease the demand for beef as well. C, an increase in the supply of potatoes, a complementary good. Okay, let's think about this. If there's an increase in the supply of potatoes, that drives the price of potatoes down, therefore more people buy potatoes. And if they buy beef with their potatoes, because they're complementary goods, as more people buy potatoes due to the lower price potatoes, more people are going to buy beef to go along with their cheaper potatoes, right? So 47, your answer is going to be C. 48. Assume more corn is used to produce ethanol. Simultaneously, more effective control of pests and weeds occurs in farming. Which volume will definitely occur in the corn market? This is a double shifter question, right? More corn is used to produce ethanol. That's an increase in the demand for corn. If you increase the demand for corn, the result is an increase in the price and an increase in the quantity, okay? Simultaneously, more effective control of pests and weeds occur in farming. That's going to result in an increase in the supply. You increase the supply, and the result is you have a decrease in the price and an increase in the quantity. What's definitely going to happen, if you have both of those happen simultaneously, quantity is going to go up. So your answer there is answer choice D. Double shifter question, super easy. Draw two supply and demand graphs, show the change in both, look at the change in price, change in quantity. Here, the price is indeterminate. One goes up, one goes down, but the quantity is definitely going to go up when both those happen. 49, the absolute value of the price elasticity of demand for a good increases when what? So elasticity, that's the coefficient test. So with elasticity of demand, we always take absolute value because the way you calculate it is the percent change in the quantity demanded over the percent change in price. There's an inverse relationship between the change in quantity demanded and the change in price. Therefore, you're always going to get a negative when you do this. So we're going to take absolute value. The negative is not relevant with the elasticity of demand. That's the only reason it says that. Don't let that throw you. So what it's saying is when the elasticity of demand goes up, that means that the numerator, the quantity demanded, is increasing faster than the denominator, which is the change in price, which means that we are very responsive to the price change. We are elastic. So which of these talks about this good being more elastic, meaning we are more responsive to the price change? A says the good has fewer substitutes. If it has fewer substitutes, so if it had no substitutes, we would not be responsive to the change at all. So that would be inelastic. B, the good becomes a necessity. Same thing, inelastic. C, consumers spend greater portions of their budget on the good. The higher the percentage of your income at good cost, the more inelastic it is as well. Remember, think about a $25,000 car versus a 25-cent piece of gum. 100% increase in both. We don't feel the increase in the price of gum. It was 25 cents, now it's 50 cents, who cares? But with a car, 25,000 to 50,000, that's a massive change. With both, it's a 100% increase. But the greater the percentage of your income, the more we feel it, therefore it's more inelastic. So A, B, and C are all talking about inelastic. D, the price of an input used to produce the good goes up. That has nothing to do, that's elasticity of supply. E, the good must be purchased immediately. If it has to be purchased immediately, then it's inelastic as well. So A, B, C, and E are all inelastic. And this is talking about the good becoming more elastic, and it would be, yeah, so I was wrong. A, B, and E are inelastic. C, it's a big portion of your income. The car goes from 25,000 to 50,000. You're not going to buy it anymore. You're very responsive. The greater the percentage of your income, the more elastic the demand for the good. So your answer for 49 is C. Because it's a greater percentage of your income, you are more responsive to the price change. So 49 is C. 50, Mickey has a $20 gift card that she is, I thought it was going to be a he. I thought Mickey Mouse. but apparently Mickey is a she. Mickey has a $20 gift card. I knew a girl named Mickey. She played tennis at Memorial a long time ago. Doesn't matter. Not spelled that way. $20 gift card she's planning on using to download 10 songs and 5 games. Okay, the download price for each song is $1. This is like a question from 2005. People don't pay money for downloads anymore. The download price for each song is $1. Download price for each game is $2. Margin utility from the 10th song is 30. Margin utility from the 5th game is 70. Which of the following statements is true? So this is a utility maximizing question. So that means that the last song that she downloaded, her margin utility was 30 and it cost her $1. So it was 30 per dollar for that last, 30 per dollar for the last song. And from the game, her margin utility was 70 and it cost her $2, which means that your margin utility per dollar was 35 per dollar. Does that make sense? So let me say it again. The 10th song yielded 30 utility per dollar because it cost $1, so 30 per dollar. The game was 70 utility for the last one divided by the price of 2. So the last game was 35 per dollar. The last song was only 30 per dollar, which means she's getting more utility from the games at this point than the songs, which means she should either purchase more games or fewer songs to bring that to equal one another. So increase utility by more games, fewer songs. Your answer is C for number 50. 51, Max Company produces electronic gadgets using labor and capital. This is the same type question. It's different because you're talking about the resource market, and the last question was talking about the product market, but it's the same thing. Like mentally, it's the exact same thing. So we're talking about reducing costs. It's your least cost combination of inputs. So it says Max increases labor and decreases capital to produce the same quantity of gadgets. What's going to happen to the marginal product of labor and marginal product of capital? So if Max is increasing labor and decreasing capital, the only reason that would make sense is if the current situation before he made this change was such that labor was yielding more per dollar and capital less per dollar. So when Max increases labor, you're experiencing diminishing returns, and so the marginal product of labor is going down. Less capital, again, you're experiencing diminishing marginal returns. So if marginal returns are going down and you reduce the amount of capital, the result is the marginal product of capital is going up. It's kind of weird. It's kind of counterintuitive, but your answer there is A, because again, if Max is increasing labor, it's the law of diminishing marginal returns. The more you increase labor, the less the additional output of the worker. And the more you decrease labor, so think of the paper chain activity. If you had 6 workers and you decrease to only 5 workers, your total product is falling, but your marginal product of that last worker went up because you were experiencing diminishing returns with that 6th worker. So if you get rid of that 6th worker, the additional output of the last worker hired, which is now worker 5, is higher. So 51, your answer is A. Kind of that's actually a really tough question. It's just kind of tricky. 52, the table below shows a competitive firm's total variable and total fixed. Okay. And then if you look at the questions below, it's asking about average variable and marginal. Okay. So we're going to have to change to put things on level footing. We can't compare total to average. We have to adjust. Okay. So if they're asking for it says output is 3, which of the following is correct? If the output is 3, total variable is 15, which means average variable is 5. Total fixed with 3 is 9. So average fixed is 3. So average variable 5, average fixed 3. So average variable is 5, which means that your answer is either A or B. What about the additional cost? Is it 6 or 7? So the additional cost is going to be the difference between the total cost with 3 and the total cost with 2. The total cost with 2 is 17, And the total 8 plus 9, right? And the total cost with 3 is 24, 15 plus 9. So the difference between total cost of 2 and total cost of 3 is 24 minus 17. So marginal cost there is 7. So 52, your answer should be B. Okay. 53 and 54, we're using the same graph here. Man, there's a lot of good questions that can come from this graph. This is either monopolistic competition or monopoly. Just looking at this graph, there's a lot of questions that can be asked. They can ask, what's the profit maximizing quantity, profit maximizing price? What's the point at which they earn zero economic profit? What's the marginal, the revenue maximizing point? What's the range of demand? Where's the elastic range on the demand curve? There's tons of questions I can ask. This question says the firm's total revenue is equal to what? The total revenue is price times quantity. They are producing where MR hits MC, which is at point L, a quantity of 1. The mistake people are going to want to make here is they're just going to go that quantity up to MR equals MC, and they're going to say it's P1, 0, Q1, L. That's wrong, because the price is derived from the demand curve above. So your total revenue is the price of P3 times the quantity of Q1. So P3, J, Q1, 0. That is P3, where is this? So the total revenue, P3, J, Q, 0 is total revenue. Why am I not seeing this? Am I blind? Here it is. 0 to P3 to J to Q1. So they started here. 0 to P3 over to J down to Q1. Answer choice C. Okay, 54, same graph. This says, what is the firm's economic profit? Profit is the revenue above the cost. So again, we just said revenue is this box from P3 over to J and down. Your cost is that quantity times average cost, Q1 up to K. So the area of profit is the revenue above the cost, P3, P2, KJ. I guess they were starting bottom left and going. So P2, P3, JK. P2, P3, JK. Answer choice C on 54. 6 more. Which of the following is true of a monopolistically competitive firm in long-run equilibrium? Burger restaurants, monopolistic competition, they cannot earn any economic profit in the long run because zero economic profit, low barriers to entry, right? So monopolistic competition in the long run, this is a situation where you're probably going to need to draw the graph because it's talking about price, marginal cost, as the exceeded is equal to it. We know we can eliminate B because it says economic profit. Nope. And yeah, I guess that's the only one, at least I'm saying, that we can eliminate immediately. So in the long run, so draw monopolistic competition in the long run, demand downward sloping, marginal revenue downward sloping, marginal cost down and up, price, quantity. This is the one where you have to draw your average total cost curve in a very specific way to run tangent to the demand curve at MR equals MC. So, right, that was not great, but not terrible. Okay, so if you were to draw monopolistic competition in the long run, it's going to look like this, right? So average total cost goes down, hits the demand curve where MR hits MC, continues to fall till it hits marginal cost. It hits its minimum or crosses marginal cost. So which is true? A, it produces where price equals marginal cost. Nope. Where MR hits MC, that is not where price equals marginal cost. Wait, yeah, marginal cost is below the price, okay, because marginal revenue is below the demand curve, so it's not A. B says it earns economic profit. We know that's wrong because it's long run, okay. C, it produces where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Yep. And the price is equal to average total cost. The price from the demand curve equals average total cost. That's your answer. Price equals average total cost means zero economic profit. So 55, your answer is C. Again, draw that graph. If you don't draw the graph, that question's going to be a lot tougher. If you draw it, it's going to be pretty easy. Okay. 56. Assume that barbershops operate in a perfectly competitive product and factor market. So perfectly competitive product market and perfectly competitive factor market. Which of them will happen to working barbers if the price of haircuts goes down? If the price of haircuts goes down, A says the marginal product of the last barber hired will not change. B says marginal product of the last barber hired will go down. C, the marginal revenue product will shift right. D, the marginal revenue product will shift left. And E, there's a movement upward along the marginal revenue curve. Okay. If the price of haircuts goes down, that does not change the ability of the barbers to cut hair. You know what I mean? So it's not A or B because, well, it's not B because B says they suddenly can't cut as much hair. That doesn't make sense. A says the marginal product of the last barber hired will not change. That's wrong. I'll show you why here in a second. C says it's going to increase the marginal revenue product, meaning it's going to increase the additional revenue generated. That's not true, not if the price of haircuts goes down. D says marginal revenue product will shift to the left. That's going to be your answer because there's a decrease in the price of haircuts. So let me walk you through why B is wrong on 56. If you were to draw this, so perfect competition in the resource market. So we have the supply and demand spot here. Side-by-side graphs. On the left, we have the market. So we have the wage, quantity. Okay, that's the market. And then on the right-hand side, we have one firm. Okay, that vertical line is the marginal revenue product. Hey, I will be after I do 4 more questions. Okay, so that horizontal line there is the additional cost of another worker, right? So it's the marginal resource cost. I think I just said marginal revenue product. That horizontal line is the marginal resource cost, the additional cost of another worker. Well, the additional cost of the worker is the wage rate set by the market, right? So if the market sets a wage rate of $100 a day for the barber, that's what the barber's going to cost, right? The marginal revenue product goes up and down. The marginal revenue product is dependent. The marginal revenue product is the marginal cost curve. It's the inverse of the marginal cost curve. It is your marginal output. You know what I mean? So on the paper chain activity, that yellow, the top of the yellow was your marginal product, the additional output. The marginal revenue product is the additional output times the price of whatever you're selling, right? And so if you made a chain of 6 links, the marginal product is 6. If you're selling them for $10 each, the marginal revenue product is 60, right? The additional revenue generated by the production of those 6 units. Okay, so what's going to happen to the marginal product of that of the last barber? Okay, the marginal output of that last barber is going to change because they have to generate more haircuts in order for you to hire them, because the price of haircuts goes down, right? So just think through this for a second. If you're paying each barber $100 a day and each haircut is $10 each, that means that dude better cut 10 heads or 10 heads of hair, or it's not worth it to hire him, right? And so let's say that last guy was cutting 10 heads of hair every day. It's worth it to hire him, right? Well, what happens if the price of haircuts goes down, like it says right here? If the price of haircuts goes down to $9, now you can't hire that guy, because if he's cutting 10 heads of hair, if he's only cutting 10 heads of hair still, if he's only generating $90 and you have to pay him $100, you're not going to hire that guy. So the marginal product that the last barber hired is going to go up because they have to cut more heads of hair in order for it to be worth it, because the price of haircuts has dropped. Hopefully that made sense. If that didn't make sense, like rewind it and listen to it again. And fast forward through Alyssa's interruption. 57. In a market with 2 firms, a firm that has a dominant strategy will do which of the following? So 2 firms talking oligopoly. A dominant strategy means they're going to do what they're going to do regardless of their competitor. And so your answer is A, they're going to maintain that strategy independent of the strategy chosen by its competitors, because again, it's their dominant strategy. If they have a dominant strategy, it doesn't matter what their competitor does. They're going to do what they're going to do, because they can't better their situation from deviating from that quadrant in the game theory matrix. 58, antitrust policies are put in place to limit which of the following? Monopoly power. That's very straightforward. So it's in order to reduce the power of monopolies, okay, to prevent collusion and stuff like that. 2 more. If the government regulates a natural monopolist to produce the allocatively efficient level of output, it will require the monopolist to set a price that is where A natural monopolist, oh boy, let me draw this one. A natural monopoly, it is a regular monopoly graph, okay? Demand downward sloping, marginal revenue downward sloping. The difference is your average total cost is continuing to fall all the way through the demand curve. So it's really stretched out and it has to hit a minimum across the marginal cost. So it looks kind of funky, okay? But it essentially looks like this. In order for it to be a natural monopoly, average total cost has to continue to decrease through the demand curve, but the math still has, the math is still the math in that it doesn't hit a minimum until it crosses the marginal cost. So marginal costs are really stretched out too. So if they're regulating where the monopolist is producing the allocatively efficient level, that's where supply hits demand or marginal cost hits demand. And if that's where they are forcing them to produce, put a big old dot there. If that's where they're forcing them to produce, show me Christmas. What you can see, hopefully, is that at that point, the cost exceeds the revenue. Right? So the price from the demand curve is less than the average total cost, which means if the government forces them to produce there, they're going to be operating at a loss. They'd be better off to shut down. And so the only way they can do that is if the government provides them with a subsidy. So your answer should be they're going to set a price where that's equal to the price is going to be equal to the marginal cost. And they're going to have to grant a subsidy to cover the loss. That looks like answer choice A. Is that right? Is that what that answer choice A says? Equal to its marginal cost and grant a subsidy. Yeah, A. Okay, last one. One major difference between public goods and private goods. So this is a public good is non-excludable and non-rivalrous. You can't prevent someone from using national defense even if they don't pay taxes. They're still protected in times of war. And it's non-rivalrous just because I'm protected from a Russian invasion because of national defense. That doesn't prevent you from also being protected, right? And so non-rivalrous and non-excludable. Private goods, they are rivalrous, meaning if I'm eating a slice of pizza, you can't also be eating that piece of pizza. That doesn't make sense. And it's excludable. I can prevent you from using my stuff if you don't pay for my stuff, right? And we have property rights. And so this says public goods exclude non-paying consumers. Nope. Public goods are like national defense. Public goods are inferior. Nope. Public goods generate negative externalities. No. It's difficult to charge customers directly for the provision of public goods. That's your answer. That's firefighters, it's teachers, it's police officers, it's national defense, it's street lights. You can't prevent people from using those things even if they don't pay taxes, okay? So 6 to your answer is D. I'll upload for your response later. See ya. Have a good night or day. I don't know when you're watching this. Bye.